The Isle of Man may not look very much like Hollywood, but it has seen its fair share of movie productions take place over here. That's because from around the mid-90s until quite recently, the Isle of Man government encouraged movie companies to come and shoot here by means of tax incentives and other initiatives. Now, depending on who you ask, this whole scheme was either a roaring success or an utter failure. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but what we do know for sure is that all these movie productions brought a lot of celebrities over here, and among the celebrities who came to shoot their movies here were Zac Efron, Burt Reynolds, David Schwimmer, Aishwarya Rai, Christian Slater, Daniel Craig, Ben Kingsley, Emilia Clarke, Peter Dinklage, Johnny Depp, Jude Law, Julie Andrews, Kathleen Turner, Kit Harington, Patrick Swayze, Penelope Cruz, Ewan McGregor, Renée Zellweger, Willem Dafoe and Steve Coogan, to name just a few. Now, the heyday of Isle of Man film was probably in the early 2000s, so you had, your best chance of bumping into a famous face back then. I remember stories of people seeing Renée Zellweger in HMV or Christian Slater not getting into the nightclub where he used to work because it was after the cut-off time, and all sorts of things like that. I will post a list of movies that were shot here in the comments down below so you can go and check them out. 3 of my favorite movies that were either fully or partially made here include Waking Ned, which was shot partially here at Niabel, Blackball, which was shot at my favorite chippy in Douglas, which doesn't exist anymore, the Carousel Chippy, and Mindhorn, which was mostly shot in Douglas. So unfortunately these days you're not going to meet very many Hollywood celebrities around here unless they come over on holiday or they move here. The Isle of Man once had its own car company called the Peel Engineering Company. It was actually based here behind me in Peel, and its most famous products are probably the P50 microcar and the Trident microcar. The P50 made it onto Top Gear a few years ago and also featured on Dragon's Den, and there's a company in the UK now who built electric replicas of the original 2-stroke P50. When the P50 came out in 1962, you could buy one for £175. But if you find an original these days, be prepared to pay a lot more than that, because only around 55 P50s and 80 Tridents were ever built, and it is believed that less than 30 of each survive. Prices for each of these microcars can reach 6-figure sums quite easily. The Isle of Man Motor Museum up in Derby actually has a couple of originals, plus a replica, plus a whole lot of other stuff from the Peel Engineering Company, and they are currently in the process of putting it all together into a little exhibition. Once that is finished, I will definitely go there and do a separate video just about Peel Engineering, because they did an awful lot more than just build that famous little car from Top Gear. In fact, they had plans, or had already built, at least 3 other models, namely the Manx car, the P1000 and the Viking. More on those once I get to dig a little deeper into the company and do a separate video. But they did also build an awful lot of other stuff, and they were experts in fiberglass engineering, so they built boats, bike fairings and even a hovercraft. But for now, your Manx fact is that we did indeed once have our own car company over here, and they did build the smallest production car in the world for a while. If you ever see an original Peel somewhere, I guarantee it will make you smile, and you won't believe how absolutely tiny it is. The Isle of Man is filled with superstitions and stories about ghosts, goblins and giants. Most famous of them all is probably the legend of the little people, or fairies. We have a fairy bridge between Castletown and Douglas, and you're supposed to greet the little people as you pass it. But of course, as any proper local will tell you, this isn't the actual real fairy bridge. The real fairy bridge is of course this one, situated at a secret location just outside of Douglas. There's no sign here saying fairy bridge, and you have to know where to look. And some people say that this isn't the real one, the other one is, or one of the other bridges on the island is. I think in the end only the fairies themselves will know which one is the real fairy bridge, and unfortunately they're not telling us. Until then, this fairy bridge and the one near the airport have become places where people like to come to remember lost ones, or to simply find some spiritual refuge and connect to the superstitions and the other beliefs that are still very much alive on this island. The Isle of Man has a very rich aviation history. So rich in fact that I will definitely do a separate video about it at some point. One of the most interesting points is the fact that it used to serve as a major aviation training base during World War II. Thousands of ongoing pilots came here and trained at airfields in Derby, Andreas and also Ronaldsway, which is today's modern airport, on their way to becoming World War II pilots. Because of the challenging terrain and the varying skill levels of the ongoing airmen, The Isle of Man saw a fair number of crashes. In fact, it is estimated that over 400 aircraft crashed on or around the Isle of Man since the beginning of World War II. The biggest aviation disaster that ever befell the Isle of Man was the crash of a B-17 Flying Fortress in 1945. The airplane crashed in the north of the island with the loss of all on board. If you are interested in the island's aviation and military history, then a visit to the Aviation and Military History Museum right next to Ronaldsway Airport is definitely recommended. Not only do they now have 2 Manx Airlines planes on display, so you can indulge in some proper nostalgia, but the museum also offers all sorts of information on the fascinating aviation and military history of this island. The Mutiny on the Bounty is without a doubt one of the most famous maritime stories in history. Many books have been written and multiple movies were made about it, and the event has a very strong Manx connection, especially where its 3 main protagonists are concerned. For starters, William Bligh, before he became captain of the Bounty, was a lieutenant in the Navy, and he was a frequent visitor to Douglas as part of his job. It was here that he met the daughter of a local customs officer, who he promptly proceeded to marry in a church up in Onken, and their daughter was christened in St. Matthew's Church not far here behind me. The family lived on the island for a while before moving to London. Then maybe the most infamous protagonist, Fletcher Christian, also has strong ties to the island. While he wasn't born here, he was from Cumbria just across the water from us, he is related to the Christian family in Milntown in the north of the island. Finally, midshipman Peter Haywood was from here. He and his family lived at the nunnery at the other part of town, and then I believe they lived behind me here at the Douglas Hotel in later days. He was famously sentenced to death not for taking part in the mutiny, but for apparently not doing enough to prevent it. His sentence was reversed and he proceeded to have a long and prosperous career in the Royal Navy. Now the whole story is a little bit too long for me to tell in this short video, so I recommend you have a quick Google and read up about Isle of Man and Mutiny on the Bounty. But yes, all 3 main protagonists were either from here or had very strong connections to the Isle of Man. All 3 of them would have met here, they probably would have gone to worship in St. Matthew's Church behind me, and ultimately all 3 of them would set off to join the Bounty from this very harbour here in Douglas. The Isle of Man is home to the largest working water wheel in the world. Called the Great Laxey Wheel, it has a diameter of 72 foot and 6 inches and it's 6 foot wide. It was built in 1854 and its primary purpose was to pump water out of the Laxey mines further down the road here. You can still see the mechanism that was used to do this. It's largely considered an absolute marvel of Victorian engineering, and its second name, Lady Isabella, comes from the name of the governor's wife at the time. They named it in her honor. Back in the day there would be hundreds of miners working here, and if you come and visit these days and feel adventurous and fit, you can walk up the 90 plus steps to the top there, and you'll be rewarded with amazing views over the whole of Laxey Valley. The Isle of Man has its own language. It is called Manx, spelled M-A-N-X, or in historical documents, sometimes also spelled M-A-N-K-S. It belongs to the Celtic language family and is closely related to Scottish and Irish Gaelic. In fact, it is often called Manx Gaelic. It used to be the first language of the Isle of Man until 1974, when the last native speaker, a fisherman by the name of Nat Madrell, unfortunately died. While you won't hear Manx being spoken on the street very much, the language is being kept alive, and there are around about 2,000 Manx speakers on the island. In fact, the language has seen a bit of a revival in recent times, and also thanks to the internet and technology, more and more people seem to be taking it up. If you are interested in learning Manx, there are plenty of resources out there. There's even a book, How to Teach Your Cat Manx, but I'm not quite sure that one really works. Mystery, more am I? More am I? More am I? While Manx is only a historical and not an official language these days, you will still see some of it when you walk around town. For example, most government buildings have their names written on the outside in English and in Manx, and you will also see Manx writing on things like fire engines and buses.